Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As we get our program underway, we would like to begin by recognizing and welcoming some civic leaders who have joined us for this afternoon's program, and we ask you to please join us in welcoming them to today's event. Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, Justice Ann Burke, is with us today. We also welcome Illinois Deputy Governor Leslie Munger. The co-chair of the Illinois Bicentennial Commission and president of the Southern Illinois University System, Mr. Randy Dunn. The president of the Metropolitan Planning Council, Mary Sue Barrett. The president of the Civic Federation, Mr. Lawrence Masal. And the president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois, Bonnie Cox. Thank you all very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to begin our program, please welcome the president of the Union League Club of Chicago, Mr. William Nissen.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the officers, directors, and members of the Union League Club, I'm delighted to welcome you to our Illinois Bicentennial celebration, which we are very proud to present in partnership with the Illinois Bicentennial Commission. We gather today to commemorate a significant milestone for Illinois, 200 years of statehood. We pause in the midst of our busy lives to reflect upon our state's rich history and to hear the perspectives of distinguished speakers. We come together mindful of the challenges we face to share our pride in the magnificent prairie state that we call home, and to celebrate the enduring contributions that Illinoisans have made to our nation. Today's celebration is especially meaningful to the Union League Club of Chicago, whose roots can be traced to the Civil War and the Union Leagues of America, an organization of citizen patriots dedicated to helping President Abraham Lincoln defend the Union. The founders of the Union Leagues of America, who gathered in Pekin, Illinois in 1862, felt that the survival of our republic depended upon what our club calls commitment to community and country. Since our founding in 1879, we have sustained that commitment in many ways, including events like this, when we come together to remember our shared obligations as citizens and to reaffirm our support for our state and our nation. By being here today and participating in today's celebration, you help us honor that tradition, and we thank you for joining us. Speaking of tradition, here at the club, we always begin our programs with the Pledge of Allegiance. So at this time, I ask everyone to please rise and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. As I mentioned, our club's history is intertwined with Illinois history in many ways, such as the club's role in shaping our state's constitution. This club urged Illinois citizens to convene the 1970 Constitutional Convention, and in fact, one of our members, Sam Whitwer, served as president of the 1970 CONCON and became known as the father of the Illinois Constitution for his role in drafting this foundational document. Today we remember the contributions that he and so many others have made to Illinois over its storied history. Extraordinary contributions by extraordinary people, men and women of every race and background, whose vision, passion, and intellect made a profound difference for our state. I commend to your attention the timeline in your printed programs that highlights those people. Figures like Nobel Peace Prize winner Jane Addams of Hull House fame, African-American surgeon Daniel Hale Williams, Myra Bradwell, the first woman admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court, and Pulitzer Prize-winning Pulitzer Prize-winning poet, Gwendolyn Brooks. These are some of the remarkable men and women who have shaped Illinois history, and we have with us today others who have contributed meaningfully to our state, including a remarkable woman who I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize. She played a significant role in the 1970 Con as a research assistant who helped draft our state's constitution. She went on to serve as parliamentarian of the Illinois House of Representatives and today as a distinguished professor at John Marshall Law School. At this time, I ask her to please stand so that we may congratulate her for her contributions and for her ongoing commitment to legal education and scholarship. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me as we recognize Professor Ann Luzine. Thank you, Ann. Thank you for being here with us today, Ann. And now, to continue our program, it is my pleasure to introduce a leader of our community and tireless advocate for diversity, social, and economic justice. Please join me in welcoming the President and CEO of Chicago United and co-chair of the Illinois Bicentennial Commission, Ms. Gloria Castillo.
Good afternoon. I have to do this, you know. I always follow very tall people. On behalf of the Illinois Bicentennial Commission, we are honored to take part in this very special bicentennial program hosted by the Union League. I would like to welcome everyone this evening and thank our event sponsor, Wintrust Bank, the bank of the Bicentennial. I'd like to begin by recognizing some of those who are here who've been working tirelessly on the Bicentennial celebration. Executive Director of the Governor's Office of the Bicentennial, Stuart Lane. Stuart. Our sponsor host this evening, Wintrust Vice President of Community Affairs and Bicentennial Commissioner, Susanna Meza. And welcome also to several Bicentennial Commissioners in attendance this evening. December 3rd, 2018 will be the 200th anniversary of Illinois becoming the 21st state of the Union. Throughout this year and all across the state, there will be programs, activities that celebrate places, events, and people who have made great contributions to Illinois, to society, and have made us all Illinois proud. The Bicentennial celebration began last August 26th on Constitution Day in Kaskaskia, the state's first capital, and with events in Chicago and Springfield on December 3rd. The Bicentennial Commission has implemented a statewide K-12 school initiative called Illinois Chronicles. Honor 200, a veterans program where we will recognize 200 veterans who go above and beyond serving their fellow veterans and their communities. We've implemented a signature legacy campaign called Bicentennial STEM Fusion, where we will award 25 underserved schools across the state with a unique teachers program to inspire 4th through 8th graders to study math and science. Tonight, you may have already sampled the official Bicentennial beer, 1818 Prairie House State Farmhouse Ale. I didn't drink any of that. That was just an actual mistake. It's really good, though. And you'll soon be seeing a video campaign that highlights the wonderful things that have been born, built, and grown in Illinois over the past 200 years. This coming August 26th, Illinois Constitution Day, there will be events across the state, including the dedication of the new Bicentennial Plaza in Springfield and a festival promoting family values in East St. Louis at the Jackie Joyner Kersey Center. And on December 3rd, a big birthday party will take place at the United Center in Chicago. For information about the Bicentennial and to learn how your communities and organizations can participate, please go to illinois200.com. Programs like the one today, Illinois Past, Present, and Future, are what the bicentennial celebration is all about. And it's important to remember the events, places, and people that have made Illinois the great state that it is. Now, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to the Executive Director of the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum and Bicentennial Commissioner, Alan Lowe.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you all for being here this evening. Thanks to the Union League, of course, for this beautiful venue. For the past year or so, I've been honored to serve on the Bicentennial Commission, and I continue to be impressed with the many and wide-ranging activities around the state, so I congratulate the leaders of the commission on a job very well done. I'm a relatively new Illinoisan, having been on the job in Springfield for just under 2 years, but I can tell you I've been deeply impressed with the history of my new home and the accomplishments of its citizens over the past 200 years. I hope you all have been to our museum and library in Springfield. We are privileged each and every day to preserve and pass on the legacy of our greatest president and of the state of Illinois. When the ALPLM, the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, was created in 2005, it incorporated what previously had been called the Illinois State Historical Library. So we have truly amazing collections related to the history of the Prairie State, and telling and teaching about that history is part of our very important core mission. Now, we've created a number of programs and products this year to embrace the bicentennial. For example, working with partners at Midwest Family Broadcasting and the Illinois State Museum, we've helped create those bicentennial minutes I hope you've heard on the radio. Working with the State Journal-Register, we've helped create the online poll IllinoisTop200.com, where you can vote on topics like top Illinois business, favorite park, and best movie involving Illinois. By the way, Blues Brothers won that category, if you were wondering. We've worked with the State Board of Education to create curriculum for students around the state, all about the bicentennial, and we were proud to be part of the team that helped create the book Illinois Chronicles. Our state historian, Sam Wheeler, who's a member of our management team and from whom you'll hear more in just a moment, has spoken around the state and worked with Illinois Humanities on their Rhodes Scholars program. In those and other ways we're celebrating this year, but I especially want to tell you quickly this evening about our bicentennial exhibit titled From Illinois to the White House, Lincoln, Grant, Reagan, Obama. That exhibit opened in March. It will run the rest of this bicentennial year. It illustrates why Illinois should be proud of its contributions to national and international leadership, as seen in the lives and legacies of the 4 presidents who had ties to our state. In this exhibit, we talk about how these 4 men came to Illinois. Only Reagan was born here, how they excelled at communicating, how sports were important to all of them in different ways, and how they fared with their fellow Illinoisans in their presidential elections. We talk about their amazing first ladies and how at the end of the day, Reagan, Obama, and Grant all had to address and embrace the powerful legacy of Abraham Lincoln. We tell these stories using some awesome artifacts and documents. There's no other word for it. Loaned to us from around the state and nation and from our own collections. For example, we have the cards that President Reagan used when making the famous Berlin Wall speech, the surrender table from Appomattox, a draft of President Obama's famous speech at Selma showing his handwritten edits, and Lincoln's briefcase that he used at the White House. We have a Grammy Award given to President Obama, Grant's saddle from the war, a love letter from Ronald to Nancy Reagan, and the quill pen that Lincoln used while president. And as you enter that gallery, our Illinois gallery, we are exhibiting, thanks to our friends at the Illinois State Archives, the original 1818 Constitution of the state of Illinois. Add to that some great interactives and a modern teleprompter that lets our guests give the Gettysburg Address, and you have a really engaging, fun, and I think educational and inspiring exhibit that helps show how these men, how these Illinoisans helped guide our nation, and how our state helped make them into the leaders they were. So I hope you all will come see that exhibit. And just one other note before I turn the podium over, just want to mention one other really important recent development. Starting this month, we began releasing our documentary editing project called The Papers of Abraham Lincoln. This online resource provides annotated transcriptions and in some cases images of documents written to and by Abraham Lincoln. The goal is to include all such documents, perhaps ultimately as many as 150,000. Right now there are about 5,000 that can be found at papersofabrahamlincoln.org. This is our beta site, so it will be added to and improved in the coming months and years, where we're very excited to be finally providing this resource to the world, and how fitting to do so during the Land of Lincoln's Bicentennial. So thank you all again for being here this evening. I hope to see you in Springfield. And I will conclude by saying that since I made the move to the Lincoln Library Museum in 2016, we have accomplished a lot. But I think I'm perhaps most proud of our role in reestablishing the post of state historian and in filling that critical position with a truly talented scholar and leader. Samuel Wheeler is an Illinoisan. His master's from University of Illinois Springfield, his PhD from Southern Illinois University. Sam speaks and teaches around the state, along with playing a key role in our management team and serving as our Director of Research and Collections. In his capacity as state historian, he helps us excel at our mission of preserving and passing on the legacy of our state, while also serving as the historian of record for the state's 56 historic sites. So please welcome the 10th State Historian of Illinois, Dr. Samuel Wheeler.
Thank you, Alan. 2 centuries separate us from the excitement that fueled the push to make Illinois the 21st state in the Union. But President James Monroe's signature is not solely responsible for the tremendous success that is Illinois history. Natural history played a significant role. The first Europeans who set foot in the Illinois country in 1673 had never seen anything like the flat, treeless prairie before them. The process of glaciation leveled the landscape thousands of years earlier, helped make the soil some of the richest anywhere in the world, and left an ingenious system of rivers and waterways in its wake. The resulting landscape led the great writer Charles Dickens to call the Illinois landscape oppressive in its barren monotony. But later Illinoisans like Governor Adlai Stevenson saw the rolling prairie as a metaphor for Illinois' capacity to think of possibilities, not limitations. We can see a long way in all directions, Stevenson said. Here there are no barriers, no defenses to ideas and aspirations. We want none. We want no shackles on the mind or the spirit, no rigid patterns of thought, no iron conformity. Illinois history is also the story of human civilization. Before Europeans ever knew of Illinois, Native Americans thrived in this corner of the world. At Cahokia, they built America's first metropolis, creating a population larger than London in 1250 A.D. Illinois history has been shaped by world history. In Illinois, the French and the British struggled for power in the New World. For nearly a century, the French controlled Illinois, and in some sections of the state, their influence is still visible. After the French and Indian War, and until the end of the American Revolution, the British ruled Illinois. In both of those conflicts, the Illinois country was a theater of war, and the treaties that ended those conflicts weren't just read with great interest in Paris and London. Those treaties changed people's lives here in Illinois. I often wonder what the 19th century Illinois pioneers would think of Illinois in the 21st century. Today, 75% of our land is devoted to agriculture. Our landscape is crisscrossed by nearly 10,000 miles of railroads. Illinois interstates are the 5th busiest in the nation, and one of our airports is among the busiest in the world. Actually, I don't think Illinois pioneers would be all that surprised. They knew what Illinois had to offer. Repeatedly, in their letters to family and friends, begging them to join them, pioneers depicted Illinois as a new Eden, a magical place where the eastern woodlands suddenly stopped and revealed rolling prairies where the soil was more fertile than any they had seen in the Old World or the New. A land with immense natural benefits like Lake Michigan, the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, and the Illinois River, Those rivers were their interstates where people and goods could flow freely. Today, Illinois is the crossroads of the nation, but it's a fact that the earliest pioneers knew, as did the Native Americans centuries earlier. Then as now, Illinois has been a magnet for individuals looking for opportunity. Today, immigrants to Chicago arrive in Illinois for many of the same reasons that propelled Thomas Lincoln and his family here in 1830. Opportunity has created one of the most diverse states in the Union, from native origins to the French and English periods, to a state settled by African Americans, Southerners, and Northerners, and transformed by millions of individuals who braved the oceans hoping for something better. By 1860, half of Chicago's population was foreign-born, leading the great architect Frank Lloyd Wright to call Chicago the national capital of the essentially American spirit. They all came to Illinois, and they continue to come here because this is where opportunity resides. Originally, the opportunity was in land that was affordable and readily available. Then to opportunities in towns and cities that were hungry for doctors, lawyers, store owners, teachers, and anyone willing to work. Chicago, the city of big shoulders, made and crushed dreams, then as it does today. Swedes, Germans, Poles, Italians, Greeks, Jews, Lithuanians, Irish, Mexicans, Cubans, Japanese, Chinese, and so many more struggled and often succeeded to make a life. And Illinois angels like Jane Addams sometimes appeared and made life among the soot and grime of industrialization more humane. It's the diversity in Illinois that makes the state's history remarkable. It's this diversity that has created a state that in so many ways is a perfect cross-section of the nation at large. Most recently, Barack Obama made a similar observation in his book, Dreams from My Father, writing, quote, "Illinois remains a microcosm of the country, a rough stew of north and south, east and west, urban and rural, black and white, and everything in between. Chicago may possess all the big city sophistication of LA or New York, but geographically and culturally, the southern end of Illinois is closer to Little Rock or Louisville, and large swaths of the state are considered, in modern political parlance, a deep shade of red." The problems the country faces, they exist here in Illinois in miniature, as do the things that make the country the greatest on earth. Perhaps this is why, throughout the last 2 centuries, Illinois has proven to be a training ground for future leaders. Innovators have not just transformed this state, their reach has shaped the nation and oftentimes the world. This is the state that developed the first steel plow and unleashed the power of the prairie. This is the home of the great emancipator, and this is the state that was the first among its peers to ratify the 13th Amendment, forever ending the 250-year scourge of American slavery. This is the state where a city burned to the ground, and from its ashes rose a city as important as any in the world. This is the state that contributed nearly 1 million soldiers to stop fascism and provided the technology that saved democracy for the world. Illinois is the land of Lincoln, the home of Ernest Hemingway and Muddy Waters, Walt Disney and Oprah, as well as the Bears, the Blackhawks, Bulls, the Fire, the Cubs, and the White Sox. And to nearly all of us here today, and to nearly 13 million others, Illinois is not just all of those things, but most importantly, it's home. Happy 200th birthday, Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wheeler. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our featured conversation on Illinois' past, present, and future. And to help us conduct this conversation with our distinguished panelists, would you please join us in welcoming to the stage our moderator, someone whose name is synonymous with excellence in broadcast journalism, acclaimed television documentary producer, host, and former CBS News anchor, Mr. Bill Kurtis.
First of all, let me compliment the Bicentennial Committee on a wonderful program. It is chock full of history, and that is exactly what we all should be doing at every event sponsored this year in the number 200. May I introduce my two compatriots who will be giving us the history lesson today. I can hardly wait to hear from them. The Dean of the Chicago City Council, the Honorable Alderman Ed Burke, would come forward. And, of course, the Honorable Governor of Illinois, Jim Edgar. Jim, I was listening to the French don't get enough credit in Illinois. And I was accompanying you in a helicopter during the big flood. I think it was from '93. We landed on the bank of the Mississippi, and we were standing there, and a farmer came up to you because he wanted to show you the deed to his land signed by Louis XIV. I think it was the 14th. After that, we had sold it, hadn't we? Gentlemen, we will not have a question today about Mr. Cohen or Sandy Daniels or whatever her name. We're going to concentrate on history in Illinois and some very interesting questions. We have given them to you. Can you reflect for us, please, on the person that you have chosen who has made a very important impact on Illinois? Governor, why don't we start with you?
Well, let me make this kind of opening statement. I'm going to refer to people who had an impact mainly on the state. If we were going to take just who had an impact on anything, we'd spend most of the evening talking about Abraham Lincoln. But I'm going to dwell on who had the huge impact on the state. And I will go back to a person early in Illinois history. In fact, one of the other questions, I'll try to maybe do two for one here. What moment in history was very important? This person made this moment, and this was the second governor of Illinois. Also, I'm going to be a little biased probably toward governors today. So just that's kind of my background. There won't be too many business leaders talked about by me, but I appreciate them. But his name was Edward Coles. He was the second governor. He came from Virginia. In fact, he was a neighbor of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and James Monroe. He was James Madison's personal secretary for the first 5 years that he was president. But Mr. Coles, he didn't like slavery. He was very adamantly against slavery, and he wanted to come to a free state, an area where he didn't have to have slavery, and he could free his slaves that his father had left him. So he came to Illinois, and he got involved quickly in politics because the hot issue, even though Illinois had admitted to the Union as not a slave state, there was strong movement to make it a slave state, and he opposed that. And he ran for governor in 1822, and the big issue was slavery, and he won. But the legislature was controlled by pro-slavery legislators, and you have to understand, back then, most of the people in Illinois at that time had come from southern states. We hadn't had the European or even the Eastern immigration that would come later. And Governor Coles fought with the legislature, but they were able to get on the ballot a call for a constitutional convention that would allow them to make Illinois a slave state. He opposed it, that referendum, and he donated all of his salary as governor, $4,000, to fund the anti-referendum campaign. Now, also all the other supporters pitched in another $1,000. So it cost $5,000, that campaign. Things were a little different back then. And they prevailed. And they defeated the attempt to bring slavery to Illinois. And I would suggest, if Illinois had become a slave state, it would have completely changed the whole nature of Illinois. I'm not sure that a lot of people that later came to Illinois and made it the great state it was and is today would have come to a slave state. And also, if Illinois had become a slave state, I'm not sure that we'd ever heard about Abraham Lincoln, because I don't think he could have prospered, he could have risen to prominence in a slave state. So back in 1824, when that referendum was held and Governor Coles was successful, I think was a huge moment in the history of Illinois.
And people things that very interesting to me is that there were, I say little colonies, but there were groups of people who had come from east, like Yale, and the elite population back there to our state and further to Kansas to vote free. So that's where the action was. We may think we're hot, but that was it. Alderman?
It's an interesting question that you've posed, Bill, and the name of the person that I've selected as being one of the most important people in Illinois history is a man who's largely forgotten in Illinois history today. In fact, if it wasn't for him, we would tonight be sitting in Kenosha County, Wisconsin. Nathaniel Pope of Kaskaskia was the secretary of the Illinois Territory in the 14th and 15th Congresses of the United States. And through some cartography changes, the design of the state of Illinois would have found the northern boundary at the tip of Lake Michigan. But because of Nathaniel Pope's creativity and his belief that Illinois needed a port, he was able to have the northern boundary of Illinois moved. And even though the territory of Wisconsin, beginning in 1836, argued against that, for decades, of course, they went on arguing that the boundary of Illinois should be at the tip of Lake Michigan. He was able to get Illinois an extra 50 miles and that great port that all of us understand devoted so much to the creation of what Illinois is today. So my vote is for Nathaniel Pope.
Very good. Well, those are the people you feel are the most important. What about the event in Illinois that was more important than others? Governor?
Well, I'll go back to that vote on slavery. I really think that was crucial and set the tone for Illinois. Again, we would not be as was mentioned, the diverse state we are, which I think is a microcosm for the nation, which has given us the strength and the ability to be the innovators and leaders, not just for here, but throughout the nation. So I think that event. One other thing that Governor Coles wanted to do, he proposed along with his opposition to slavery, he wanted to see a canal built from Lake Michigan to downstate Illinois, because he recognized even back in the early 1820s how important Lake Michigan and that part of the state was going to be to the rest of the state. He was not successful as he had been on preventing slavery. It took many more years. But again, I just, as far as a crucial moment, I think those early years in Illinois set the stage for a lot of, and there have been a lot of other crucial moments. But if we had had that first crucial moment, I don't think we'd have had anything like we've seen become Illinois in the last 200 years.
Bill, I would suggest that the event that was key to Illinois' history took place on May 18th, 1860. And when you leave tonight, you can drive or walk past the corner of Canal and Lake, where just about 8 months ago we rededicated a marker commemorating the site of the wigwam, the convention hall that nominated Abraham Lincoln, in a convention rigged by Chicago politicians. But for that fact, at that event, Abraham Lincoln would never have been president of the United States. And the ifs and what fors that we could speculate on would be endless. What if he had not prevailed in that convention and had not gone on to what most historians, if not all historians, believe is the greatest president in our nation's history?
You can only imagine that if he had known what was coming, whether or not he would have wanted to be president.
Well, he did tell Judge Davis, make no deals.
And Judge Davis went and made the deals.
He sure did.
Governor, you actually have served in two statewide offices, Secretary of State and Governor. Tell us about your experience there and the time you spent, and whether there are any accomplishments that stand out as particularly meaningful to Illinois.
Bill, that's a dangerous question to ask a former elected official. Was there anything successful or anything that you especially want to remember? First of all, let's say I had the greatest opportunity. I grew up in Coles County and didn't know these things about Governor Coles until much later, downstate Illinois. And I had a great opportunity to become Secretary of State, then Governor. And let me just say there's no better job in American politics, at least in the 1990s, than be a governor of a large state in the United States. It was a great opportunity, and one that I feel very fortunate that I had the chance to do. The state is made up, and I didn't appreciate it until I became Secretary of State and spent a lot more time in Chicago and traveled the state. What a wonderful state this is. What a diverse state this is. What great people. And while politics, there are days you wonder, why am I doing this? Most of the people are really good. Most of the people you find, even if they're going to vote for you or not, they're very friendly. They don't say bad things about you. And it's rewarding to be able to serve and to help people. Secretary of State, I think the one thing that I came away from there feeling good about, when I first became Secretary of State, the first thing I decided, let me say a little bit about taking credit too. About a year after I was governor, I was out of office, I'd left the governorship. I was out at Scottsdale with Jerry Reinsdorf, who's the managing partner of the Chicago Bulls and the White Sox, and I was at a White Sox-Cubs game with him. And he said to me, he says, you know, Governor, while you were governor, the Bulls won the NBA 6 times. And I said, Jerry, I didn't have anything to do with that. He says, Governor, you get blamed for a lot of things you didn't have anything to do with. Take credit for some things you didn't have anything to do with. Well, I'm going to try to mention a couple things that I really think I had something to do with. First is, when I became Secretary of State, Illinois probably had the weakest drunk driving law. For the most part in Illinois and around the nation, drunk driving was kind of a joke. You'd have Dean Martin, drinking, nobody, there's nothing wrong with it. That's just part of life. You can't change that. In fact, my predecessor, Alan Dixon, when he was Secretary of State, had been arrested for drunk driving. And 2 years later, he was elected United States Senate. So it just didn't have people just didn't view it as that serious or anything we could do about it. And I guess one of the things I'm proudest about is that in that 10-year period I was Secretary of State, and I had the privilege, President Reagan named me to the Drunk Driving Commission, National Drunk Driving Commission. And I think, I always said if I'd have died after I was Secretary of State, I'd put on my tomb, Jim Edgar is known for being against drunk driving. People said you can't do anything, you can't change people's habits. I would say at the end of the 10 years, we had changed culture on drunk driving, changed habits. And that is the most important thing you can do when you're trying to solve a problem, change your culture and change habits. Laws are important, but more important than that. So I feel very good about that. Let me mention one thing as governor. Now, most people, governor, they write about him and they say, well, he's the guy that came in with a deficit and he got that taken care of and left a huge surplus and did great things on the budget. That's all well and good, but that, as we know, is not very permanent. I think it was gone in 6 months after I left. But one thing, and nobody ever talked much about this, though President Clinton did invite Brenda and I to the White House to give us an award for it. Illinois went, during that 8 years that I was governor, and that was as much effort probably as Brenda as me, is we went from last in adoption to first in adoption in the nation. And to me, perhaps there was nothing more important we could do in government, or we could do as a people, is to help children have a loving home. Now, education, all these other things are very important. But without having the opportunity to grow up in a loving home, you really start way behind. And your chances of succeeding are very low. So, though, as I said, I don't think there was ever more than maybe a small press story about that in Illinois. To me, that is probably what I'm the proudest of as governor.
Good choice. Alderman, you've seen an awful lot in the city of Chicago during your 150 years as member of the city council.
But who's counting?
But who's counting? And you were a police officer. What are your reflections?
Well, like the governor, I've had an opportunity to occupy a front row seat to watch the politics of Chicago and the government of Chicago over the last 50 years. But increasingly, I've come to believe in the wisdom of so many who have preceded us. The governor referred to the Illinois-Michigan Canal, which opened in 1848. But for the political leaders that had the wisdom to understand how they could link the Great Lakes with the Gulf of Mexico, Illinois would not be the state that it is today. So many things in commerce and industry flowed from that wisdom. Likewise, when we think about the leaders of northern Illinois, not only in Chicago, but throughout the metropolitan Chicago area, who conceived of creating something out of a small regional airport in the northwest suburbs to make what is today one of the great airports of the world, about to embark upon an $8.5 billion program that's going to change the face of that airport and that region. Just imagine how many people come through the airport every day and grab their bag off the turnstile and say to themselves, why is that ORD on there? What has that got to do with O'Hare? Well, it's because originally that small airport was called Orchard Field. And in 1949, the Chicago City Council named that airport O'Hare Airport in honor of a great American hero who won the Medal of Honor in February of 1942 when he shot down 5 heavy Japanese bombers and saved the USS Lexington, one of just 2 aircraft carriers left in the Pacific at the beginning of the war. But for that, saving of the USS Lexington, which went on to fight in the Battle of the Coral Sea, which was the precursor of the Battle of Midway, which all historians recognize as the turning point in the war, what would have happened in the Second World War. But at any rate, O'Hare Airport stands as a great tribute to a great American hero who lost his life about 18 months later. As a Medal of Honor winner, he was entitled to remain in the U.S. for the duration of the war, but he chose to go back to join his unit, leaving behind his wife, who was pregnant with their first child, to join his unit in the Pacific, and about 18 months later was lost in a nighttime operation off the island of Tarawa. So whenever I get a chance to talk about O'Hare Field, I like to remind people about a great American hero who we should remember, and it's why we fly next to the Stars and Stripes on the main concourse of O'Hare Field, the MIA POW flag, because Butch O'Hare really was lost at sea. His plane and his remains never recovered.
Who was it? Nice. Who was his father?
His father's name was Edward O'Hare Sr. And those of you who have seen the movie The Untouchables, let me disabuse you of that Hollywood myth. Eliot Ness never laid eyes on Al Capone. The case against Capone was made by a Treasury agent by the name of Frank Wilson. And when Wilson came to Chicago at the instructions of the Department of Justice, he was able to locate an informant. The informant's name was Edward O'Hare Sr. Now, clearly there was no Witness Protection Act in those days. There was no way that he could be protected in the event that the Capone mob would find out about his cooperation with the government. And it is alleged and believed by some Chicago historians that the reason for that cooperation was a father's love for his son. He desperately wanted to get young Butch into the Naval Academy at Annapolis. Sure enough, after he starts to cooperate, Butch is appointed to Annapolis, goes on, graduates as an ensign, and becomes a line officer. He's then selected for training at Pensacola, becomes a naval pilot, and then in that fateful day, in the darkest days of the nation's history, in February 1942, happens to be aboard the USS Lexington, saves the USS Lexington, which goes on to fight in the Battle of the Coral Sea, the precursor to the Battle of Midway. So I can make out a premise. If it wasn't for Capone, I'd be talking to you in Japanese.
Thank God for Al Capone. I'll tell you.
By the way, tragically, O'Hare Sr. was shot down and murdered at the corner of Ogden and Rockwell in 1939 as a coming home present for Al Capone, who was to be released from prison just a few days later.
Wow. What about the state of the state today, 2018?
Well, it's not good. I mean...
when does this program conclude?
Yeah. Let me just say that it's better now this year than it was a year ago because we got a budget. I mean, I know a lot of people don't want to hear about finances and budgets. They're kind of boring. Good government's boring. And the basis of running a government is you've got to have management, you've got to have a budget. And going 2 years without a budget, to me, was probably the worst experience this state has had in my lifetime. I mean, as bad as the Blagojevich experience was, this was much more damaging to the state because it affected a lot of institutions. It's going to take years to improve. Now, saying that, this time, well, about 11 months ago, I guess, when the legislature finally passed a budget, and I will tell you that I was surprised. I didn't think it would happen, just knowing the political environment in Springfield. But I particularly was impressed, and I think who should get a little mention in history were those 10 Republicans who crossed party line, went against their governor, and voted for that budget and voted for the override. Now, that brought the state back from complete financial disaster, would have been complete disaster for state government, which has a huge impact on the state. So we're still alive. We're still holding on. But we still have more to do. That wasn't the greatest budget in the world, but it was a budget. And we need one this year. But saying that, this state is a great state. It has all kinds of resources. Our universities, even though they were hurt by this, we still have the greatest universities in the world. I mean, I don't know there are that many students trying to beat down the doors to go to school in Beijing. But they are beating down the doors to go to U of I, Northwestern, University of Chicago, and many of our other schools. We have the greatest agriculture land. I mean, we're the transportation center of the nation. The list just goes on and on. So don't think that this state is Puerto Rico. And this city is not Detroit. I mean, we got one of the greatest cities in the world to be kind of the spark plug of the state. And so I think we're still a great state. We've had some problems in leadership at the state level the last decade, 2 decades now. You can look at the studies, and this state continued to go up throughout its history until the end of the 20th century. And we've stalled since the 21st century as far as state government doing their job. I'm hopeful that will improve. After the election, whoever's elected governor will put a lot of this nonsense behind us and get down, and we'll get back to what I think has been always the hallmark of Illinois. State government, be it Chicago, downstate Chicago, and downstate or state government in Chicago, is we come from different points of view, we have different priorities, but at the end of the day, we've got to come together, we've got to compromise, and we've got to get things done. Now, we always used to do that, and I think we still can, and we got to get back to it. And unfortunately, we got off that path, and it's created some real serious problems. But again, I'm not pessimistic about Illinois' future at all. I think this is a great state. We have great resources. We have great people. I don't think there's a flaw in our Constitution. I just think some of our leaders have made some mistakes, and we've got to get away from that. We've got to get back to the ability to understand in a democracy, you have to compromise. You have to treat people with civility. And you always have to remember at the end of the day, we're here to help people in government. We're here to solve problems. And if we don't do that, a lot of innocent people will get hurt. And a lot of innocent people got hurt the last few years. But I'm hopeful that we're back on track, and after this election, we can move ahead.
Alderman, let me set you up a little bit different. We're sitting right in the middle of the largest building boom in Chicago history. That includes a period after the fire, after the Columbian Exposition. You can hardly drive across town without running into new construction, west side, north side, south side. And yet, we have a violence problem. And when you bring up Al Capone, you say, well, wasn't that a violent time? Not compared with this, I would say.
I authored a book a few years ago on the history of police officers killed in the line of duty in Chicago. And something that we were struck by when we started doing the research were the number of police officers killed in the late 20s and 30s. And if somebody looked at those statistics and would see that striking number, they'd say, well, that's because of organized crime, Al Capone gangs. No, that was not the case. The reason that those officers lost their lives in the line of duty was that people were hopeless, they were despairing, they were jobless, they were unable to provide for their families. And I think what sociologists are telling us, and have been telling us for many years now, is that those causes, the root of those violent problems, is some of those social ills that we all know exist out there. That wide gap between the haves and the have-nots seems to have grown wider over the years. And certainly when people see all that economic vitality and the jobs that are available going around them, they're going to be disappointed and anxious. That's not to say that we need to ignore the enforcement of our criminal laws. I know that perhaps among many of us here today, we say, well, it's out in the west side, it's out in the south side. But this past weekend, here on the Gold Coast, carjackings now have, and many of us know two of the victims over the weekend. This simply cannot be permitted to go on. It's getting too close to home.
Now, we do have new technology that seems to be making a dent. Maybe it's too soon to draw conclusions on that.
Well, I was at the 8th District today where they inaugurated a new technology that permits the shot spotters to identify where a shot happens and immediately transmit that information to the police. In the 8th District on the southwest side, would you believe that since this technology has been in effect, homicides have dropped 100%.
Really?
It's absolutely remarkable. I hope that all the taxpayers of Chicago could witness this and see where their tax dollars are going.
Governor, despite being a wonderful state, we're losing people. And that's in a pretty dramatic fashion. How do we stop it? Is it taxes? Is it worry about the government? Is it just the weather?
I think the weather sometimes might help. You know, when I was governor, I'd meet with business leaders, and I said, all right, what motivates you? I said, is it taxes? What is it? And they said, no, taxes. Oh, we don't like paying taxes. But that's not it. They said, we care about the quality of life. We want safe streets. We want good schools. But perhaps most important from state government, we want stability. We want to know 10 years from now just what's going to be our responsibility. What are you going to charge us? What can we expect? And, you know, again, I think the unpredictability about Illinois in the last few years has played into part of this exit. Now, I don't think the exit is as large as some of people might think. I've watched the demographics. Now, I think the decade in the 90s, when I was governor, I think the state grew by almost 1 million people. That's the largest growth we ever had. That was huge. We had a lot of immigrants come in. We had a lot of new jobs. But I think we started to slow down. And again, I don't think we can't turn it around. But I think, again, we need to show that the state is solving the problems, that we're meeting the challenges, and try to remove this uncertainty, and to try to reassure people that Illinois is a great place to live, do business. So again, I'm not pessimistic about it. I just think we need to recognize our problems, but we also ought to, I think, not just always badmouth Illinois, but I think we ought to point out this is a great state. We have a lot to offer. Chicago's a great city. I mean, we have great universities. We have a lot of things good here that we need to talk about, as well as to identify the problems and solve it. And I'll go back and say the first thing we got to solve, we've got to get the state back on fiscal sound footing. And that's not going to be easy, and that's going to take some give and take, and people aren't going to be happy probably when they get their tax bills or where they see certain services cut. But again, I think that's all doable, and I think that we can turn this problem around. But we're still a major state. We're still a very viable state. We still have a lot to be proud of, and I think that we still have a bright future.
Edward?
Governor Jim Edgar was elected governor of the state of Illinois by the widest margin of any governor in the history of this great state. And I believe one of the reasons...
Excuse me, I was reelected.
Reelected.
I barely got elected the first time.
Reelected by the widest margin.
Yeah.
It's safe to say the widest vote count in Illinois history for a reelection as governor. And one of the reasons is that he connected with the people of Illinois and took the advice of a great Anglo-Irish philosopher and political leader whom I'm fond of quoting. The great Edmund Burke said that in politics, there are no permanent enemies, no permanent friends, only permanent interests. And I think Governor Edgar was an example of working together regardless of party or politics.
Thank you.
It's the truth.
Governor, can you run again?
I'm too old. I'm too old.
I asked that of Tony Blair, and he's, of course, changed his tune on Brexit. He's against Brexit now, and he feels that the refugees coming across Europe, and it's the second time I've asked him, and his eyes just rolled back as if he was really sorry. He said, no, I just can't. And I was sorry, too. We are at the end of our discussion today. Thank you all for coming. I always like to remind people and misquote history as the Union League being formed to elect Ulysses S. Grant president. It was formed in Pekin, Illinois, founded, if you will. You've been reading your little program today. But The dinner, I think, that was going to kick off his presidency was in the Palmer House. And what really impressed me was that they had 1,000 people there. One of those big pictures where everybody sits still for a moment and they take it. And you look down at the menu and it looks better than it is today. And the MC was Mark Twain.
Can we have a closing remark?
Yes, please.
The governor was generous in citing the contributions of Brenda to Illinois and her work on adoption. One of the dates that doesn't appear in the program I'd like to suggest be amended. July 20th, 50 years ago, was the founding of Special Olympics, which now has spread to 172 nations around the world. I'd like to acknowledge the foundress, whose idea it was to create Special Olympics.
Who was that, Alderman?
And who I was privileged to marry up in 1968, 50 years ago, Ann Burke.
Soon to be the subject of a motion picture appearing in a neighborhood near you. President Nixon, would you toot us off, please?
Thanks very much to all three of you for being here today and for all your wise insights on Illinois, past, present, and future. Let's give the three speakers another hand. Gentlemen, Alderman Ed Burke, Governor Jim Edgar, and Bill Kurtis, I have a gift to present to you to express our appreciation for your participation in today's program. A piece of Illinois history that we hope you will appreciate. You will recall my earlier reference to Sam Witwer, a member of our club who served as president of the 1970 Constitutional Convention and who played a seminal role in drafting that document. From our archives, we have for each of you a numbered, limited edition official copy of the 1970 Illinois Constitution signed by President Witwer. Please accept these as a token of our appreciation and as a memento to remember today's program.
Oh, you're kind to say that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Before we wrap up, I'd also like to express our appreciation to our club's Public Affairs Committee and its chairman, Mr. R.D. Yant, and to our Illinois Bicentennial Task Force led by Mr. Michael Robinson, and to the Union League Club's Executive Director of Public Affairs, Mr. David Cohn, for all their work on today's celebration. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our formal program, but we invite you to continue to enjoy more food and refreshments until we adjourn in about a half hour. Thank you again for being with us today, and happy birthday, Illinois.